Welcome everyone to NativeScript Community Chat, August 5th, 2020. We have a number of exciting updates to give you on NativeScript 7, which is deep underway. And it involves a pretty big shift for the framework in general. Some of this we've mentioned in the past couple weeks, and a lot of them are related to each other. So I'm going to try to break down some of these in a way that makes sense. We're also going to try to write some blog posts on some of this material over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're targeting NativeScript 7 at the last week of August and working on some changes for the CLI at the moment, which is the main last pass we need to do. So one of the big shifts for 7.0 is this ES5 to ES 2017 and higher. You can even target ES 2020. And the blog post that we'll write will describe this a bit better, but in short, ES5 is considered a bit old these days. There are optimizations that can be done with newer ES targeting for the V8 engine, which iOS and Android will be running on the JavaScript V8 engine. And we want to move the framework along with modern JS practices. So a lot of other frameworks are doing this already. Angular 10, as some of you know, already dropped default support for ES5 and requires this new targeting, which is kind of what forced us in a way to do this with NativeScript. We wanted to do it, but we weren't sure if we were going to do it for 7 or 8, but we decided to go ahead and do this. All this work is taking place on a Monorepo branch that exists on the main repo here. And if anyone is curious to look at source changes, they're all taking place on this Monorepo branch. It's looks like a scary set of changes, but a lot of it is because we brought in some source for the whole framework in together, like with Webpack. So Webpack is now managed alongside of NativeScript Core. We're also bringing in some other aspects of the framework, but we did a good bit of refactoring in Core. We've cleaned up a lot of kind of odd things that have been around for over the years that have become generally old practices. We cleaned those up to take advantage of this new targeting. One big thing we got rid of is a bunch of nested package JSONs. So if you were to look in your node modules and TNS core modules or NativeScript core, you'd see a bunch of nested package JSONs. This was largely used historically for CommonJS targeting, and also the fact that the iOS and Android counterparts were often compiled as iOS and Android JS, but they needed a way to point to the main index. And so package JSONs were generally done that with CommonJS. But in modern targeting, we can use just indexes to organize those. And so that's what we've done a lot on this Monorepo. So again, ES5 to ES 2017 and in higher. So I mean, once this comes out, you can target actually ES 2020, and you'll be able to stay on par with kind of the latest JS ecosystem in that direction. So that's a big thing for NativeScript 7.0. What it means is a number of nice things for everyone. One is that it's going to enable true tree shaking, and we added some things to Webpack to improve this as well, which I'll touch on. But the first thing off the bat that this jump to new JS standards introduces is the need for this native class decorator. We've mentioned this in some of the latest Angular 10 posts we've been talking about, but the native class decorator is needed in order for native class extensions to work under this new targeting. The runtimes, let me just illustrate this for you a little bit better. So let me see. I'm going to pull up compiled core against a couple different targets here, and I'm going to show you some bits of NativeScript 7 and that native class decorator in use. Let's see. Okay. So this is a look at a bundle from a NativeScript 7 compiled code base. And what I want to look for here, actually let me keep this off to the side because I want to show you all something related to this. So UI temp bar controller. Okay, so here's an example. This is a constructor and it extends here that's required for the runtime. So the runtimes can extend native class behavior by this syntax here. So this syntax is really important for native class extensions. Now ES 2015 and higher, ESM syntax is going to look like, let's see, I can show you this class, I think would be a good example right here. So this uses standard ESM syntax where we have a class that extends another ESM target here that is Webpack. And so this is another example. All of these core classes use standard ESM syntax here. This is where we can start to take advantage of V8 optimizations with modern ES targeting. And for all of the native class extensions, the decorator is going to be used to flag the compilation that those native class extensions can use the right syntax. So we refactored all of core to use this already. And if I show you all what we have here, you can see these are all the places in core modules that are now decorated with this native class decorator here. And it's very simple. It's any class that extends any native class on iOS and Android can add this decorator here. Now we are also probably going to allow some niceties with this decorator. For instance, some of you probably know about the Objective-C exposed methods or Objective-C protocols. This is a way to kind of expose a very specific syntax in the NativeScript runtime to deal with behavior in the iOS and Android runtimes. And these properties sometimes can be hard to remember. Even for us, we may forget exactly the syntax used. And so the native class decorator is going to take an option block that is going to give some extra helpers here. Now we're still going to probably improve the naming here as well as give descriptions on what these properties do. And this may be part of NativeScript 7.1 when we finalize the actual API for the option block. And we'd love to hear some input from everyone out there as to what they believe is really intuitive on the naming. Protocols, interfaces, native class name, some of these things are usually used in Android, like the native class name may signal exactly the package name that's used in Java in Android when it's compiled down. But protocols and interfaces, protocols used for Objective-C, we want to improve how this option block really teaches what is possible with those native class extensions, and it would automatically annotate your class with the proper syntax for the runtime. And that way you wouldn't necessarily need to remember some of these proper syntaxes and could define that clearly and consistently for all of those there. But right now, the native class decorator works in this form or in this form. You can really use either. And we're already decorating that in core here. So core on the latest RCs is compiled targeting ES 2017. On the next target, we may actually take that to ES 2020. And we'll probably start doing all of core and really everything around NativeScript with the latest ES targeting there. Let me go back to the compiled source. So this is probably confusing, or can be confusing for sure on the surface to any newcomers to JavaScript and what all this means, but I'll say in short, what it means is we can align the NativeScript framework with modern JS practices and keep it in line with kind of the latest things that are happening there, which will enable some powerful things like tree shaking. And this is also why we got rid of all these deep path imports. As most of you know, in a lot of projects today, you'll see stuff like this. TNS core modules, there's very different forms of these deep imports. Often even the folder was duplicated by the file name, so you could have dupes here, like application/application. There was even stack layout/stack layout. All of this was really, to be honest, a mess. And this makes it really difficult for us to do refactorings under the hood for core modules because we really want to start to pull things apart, reorganize it, refactor it, and we don't want that to affect people from this day forward. By continuing to use core modules in this way, it makes it hard to kind of provide you with automatic migration and AST transformations that could help update your projects in a similar way that auto migrators do, because there's so many of these varied forms. But also this plays into tree shaking, because oftentimes this star as syntax, this doesn't give you the exact symbol that you want, so there's no real way sometimes for the tree shaker to get in and understand exactly the symbols that you're using off of that barrel. So we're reducing, of course, all of this to the single barrel NativeScript core. So all of this right here, if this were actually in your code or in a plugin, could be reduced to this. And by doing that, we allow the Webpack tree shaking, which I definitely recommend anyone out there who has not seen this tree shaking guide on Webpack.js to actually take a look. It's a really well-written document on kind of what tree shaking means in the modern JS ecosystem, but you can see it was actually added for ES 2015 modules with Webpack 2. So this has been around now for really a couple of years now, but core modules still wasn't being targeted with ES 2015 and higher. So part of NativeScript 7, again, to get on that level, allows us to engage with these more advanced JS features as well as bundling. And you can see it states here that with Webpack 4, they expand on the capability with the way to provide hints via the package side effects. And so we're going to be using this in NativeScript 7 as well in core package, and we'll probably start using this in some plugins too as just a way to give more optimizations to all NativeScript projects. But I'll let everyone read this on their own time as far as the details of this, and we're going to be doing probably some other posts with some analysis of tree shaking against core and NativeScript 7 to kind of dive into this a bit further. So all in all, some really nice stuff to align it with modern times. Lastly here, to this point, with all of this new modernizations that we're doing, we added some niceties to Webpack and the Webpack configs. So let me open one of the new Webpack configs. All of them will have this setting. It's these two new properties here, global.isAndroid, global.isIOS. This is something that's been wanted for a number of years from the community, and generally what this allows is for your development builds, it allows Webpack to strip out conditional statements in your code. Now, a lot of you probably already do this, perhaps with your own custom Webpack, but one thing that was not handled was in core, and also a number of kind of edge cases around your code. And I think a lot of people in NativeScript know that there's a best practice to write iOS and Android implementations in split files. So you can do .iOS or .android, and that's still a best practice for splitting up big chunks of iOS or Android specific implementations. However, as we all know, or at least those that have been doing NativeScript for some time, and if you've seen any NativeScript projects out there, a lot of times you do just want to do simple conditional hooking. These could be 4 or 5 lines specific to each platform, and it's not enough to really warrant creating an iOS or Android file just for that behavior, so you just conditionally hook it. And this is going to allow those to be stripped in your development builds for either platform. So if you had, what I'm talking about specifically is, let me show you an example from core itself. So this right here. So core uses a lot of this itself. There's a lot of iOS and Android splits in core, but in some cases, in some functions, like this is one that's related to common behavior between dialogues, there's actually an iOS hook in here that only deals with setting up the UI when this is executed on iOS. Now, what's nice with the new Webpack configs is that when you run core on either platform, because of these new properties in here, it's going to automatically strip that code already. So in the bundle, this bundle here is for an iOS app that's inside of this new core built target using the new Webpack configs. And so we can actually look for that method, for instance. Get button colors is one we can look for. And we can see that it actually reduced this to true because that's coming from that Webpack config definition that we have there. And then if we were to look at for the same code on Android, so this is actually a bundle that was run against an Android app. Let's look for the same method here. We can see that this is false and the code was actually stripped. Now, what's nice about this is when you do an uglification with Cursor on, so when you're doing an actual production build, this line is going to be stripped completely. So not only do your development builds get just a bit faster because you get code stripped out that doesn't need to be there, so the bundles end up being a bit faster, slimmer on each target platform, but then when you do production builds, these will be stripped out altogether. So all in all, this kind of combines with creating a much more optimized situation with NativeScript Core, as well as your projects that start consuming and targeting ES 2015 and higher. So this is kind of all part of this big push to modernize some of the things that had been done in ES5 for quite a long while. So that is kind of the update on some of the big things coming with NativeScript 7. Like I said, we're going to write a bit more about this. We'll probably do 1 to 2 articles at least before the end of August, and maybe 3 on these topics. One in particular we do want to get into detail on is some tree shaking and provide some numbers and analysis there as to what all of the new targeting brings with regards to tree shaking and how to use it. A lot of this will probably be enabled in the new Webpack configs. So even as we added some new things in the new configurations, we'll probably tweak the Cursor production builds here. So these optimizations for production builds will probably tweak to engage with proper tree shaking as well. So for most people out there, if you remove your Webpack config and start using the latest NativeScript Webpack, it'll actually replace your project with the latest Webpack configuration. And so you can kind of take advantage of those right when this becomes released. So it's worth noting some of this is out already. So there is an @NativeScript Webpack package that's published. It's now at 2.1.1, I believe. And it has some of these latest Webpack configs. We've largely been using them with Angular 10. And that's because Angular 10, as I mentioned, had dropped default support for ES5. So we started doing RCs and all of the NativeScript 7 builds with ES 2017 targets. And that allows all of NativeScript Core to work out of the box with Angular 10. And that kind of drives all the other framework integrations to kind of bring all of that up to date. So all in all, it's a really good thing. It ended up being quite a lot for us to take on this summer for sure, but we're excited to be through the bulk of it. We're probably 75% of the way there. What's left for us in 7.0 is some updates to the CLI, which actually we've been working on for a little bit, and we're continuing with some of that this morning. But the CLI is going to allow scoped runtimes, as we've mentioned before, and also this NativeScript config file to try to reduce some of the noise and surface area around project configuration. And some of this we've mentioned in the Slack channel, but if you have not seen it, what we're kind of referring to is the fact that NativeScript projects have this embedded package that is inside of often the source file or the app folder inside the project. This contains runtime configuration details, and then in addition, there's also this nsconfig that contains project configuration details, and then in addition, there's also this NativeScript key, which is in your package JSON. We are getting rid of all of this and reducing it all down to a single NativeScript config to be a singular place to control all of that. We probably will go so far as to allowing plugins to tie into that too. So it'll be kind of a singular config file to control a number of aspects around project configuration details, plugin handling, and all sorts of things. I'd imagine it might grow into quite a lot of power details inside of a singular config. We hope to keep it obviously not as complex as a Webpack config by all means, but to the extent we can, we're going to try to strongly type it, whether it's a TS file that's strongly typed with an interface that gives you nice descriptions on what you can actually do inside that config file and kind of describe what different things are, but we're definitely shooting to make it as nice as possible. And if we don't get it strongly typed by 7.0, we probably would do it by 7.1. So that's all coming, I would say. I'm trying to think with regards to core, that is the bulk of it. I'll show you a little bit of the Monorepo. So as I mentioned, all this work is taking place on this Monorepo. All the RCs are published from this Monorepo structure here. And when this hits master, it will make contributing to core quite a bit more fun as well as clear. So the first thing after you use the latest repo is you can run setup, which will basically set up the workspace for development. And then from there, the only command you need to know is npm start. npm start is going to pull up an interactive environment that describes what's actually available to do in the Monorepo. We have a number of apps that are configured for different things. There's an automated app that is an automated EE test runner. This executes a bunch of EE tests against iOS or Android. We have a toolbox that's mainly meant to play around. So if you just have an idea you want to tool around with in core, or there's an issue that you ran into, this is a good target to kind of check some of those things against, as well as even try to work on fixes. We will use the toolbox ourselves often to fix GitHub issues. There's a UI app target. This contains a ton of UI samples to prove out different UI behavior. I can show you a little bit of what that looks like. Some people have never seen it before, although it actually has always lived in the repo. It was a little confusing to run in the past. Let's see if I do have one here. Actually, I can run these automated tests first. So this is actually a bunch of automated UI tests that core runs against here. This is actually running against a number of verifications against UI components. You can see it runs very fast. This is the automated test runner. This has been in core as well, but again, a lot of people may have never seen it, may have not known how to run it, but we're exposing that in a simple way for you to interact with and even experiment with yourself by this interactive command setup here. In addition, you can even build core yourself. So anytime you're playing around with changes and you're doing things inside of the core source code, you can actually build core for npm, which builds it to the dist packages directory. So right now, if we look inside dist packages, we will see that there's a number of TGZs here. When you build for npm, it will actually pre-package up the latest of what's on that branch you're working on, contain any changes, and this can either be published right out to npm, or this can also be used against your own project. So if you were working against some changes and you wanted to experiment with things in your own projects, you could actually build core just by executing this command here for build core. There's unit tests that will run. We can run some of these now. And in fact, you don't have to go up and down through this list. You can actually just start typing. So we can do core, and we'll do tests, and we'll run the unit test, and we'll show you what those do. Generally, we can look at how fast these run. That's it, 106 passing unit tests. These deal with different things from the CSS parser and observable. There's some low-level class unit tests there. If I go back, we can also run a build. We can do the build for npm here. This is going to do again, an exact build like the CI would do for npm. So this really gives core to you in exactly the same way that it would be built in production, in the way that we'll be doing in CI in an automated fashion. The other thing about this monorepo and the structure of it is that we have Webpack in here now, and it drives all of the apps. So all of the Webpack configuration details, we are going to keep aligned with all the latest Webpack releases. And the package itself now with the latest is all up to date with the latest Webpack plugins. So these are all using the latest of what is available. And these latest changes are always tested against the apps inside the workspace. So all of these are configured to actually run off of the Webpack configuration that is here. So it allows us to more efficiently update Webpack configs as well as changes, and then qualify those against testing targets that are already set up to qualify core. So it really helps to streamline that process and updating Webpack, keeping it in line with latest, and also having a good place to verify against. And I think with that in mind, that is the latest update there. Again, just to reiterate, we're shooting for the end of August for a 7.0 initial release. A lot of RCs are out there now. At NativeScript Core has RCs that run the latest. We're continually publishing some RCs out there, sometimes multiple times a day, because we are developing against these RCs on a very regular basis, and continuing to make some refactoring, some optimizations in core as all part of this 7.0 release. So definitely you're welcome to try NativeScript Core RC out there and try some of this with some of your projects. The biggest thing you'll run into is the import path changes that we mentioned here. Since we are getting away from this style, really we want, it'd be nice if everyone could move to NativeScript Core, because this is going to create a much better landing place for everyone. Again, it'll make it easier for us to make automated transformations to your code in the future. So like for NativeScript 8, we probably will go the direction of splitting UI out. So things like stack layout, grid layout, all those things that are UI-based bound, button and label, that stuff may break out into an @NativeScript UI package, but once everyone is using NativeScript 7, it'll be much easier for us to have a migration that can split these symbols out into the NativeScript UI package for you. And that way you don't have to deal or even worry about import path or update changes anymore, because we'll be able to have some automated transformations from a much cleaner point, all with tree shaking in mind and all using the latest ES targeting. That is all the updates I had for now. I'll open up for Q&A. If anyone has a question, and if not, we can close the call. I'll give it just a minute here. On that note, listen, everyone, thanks for joining, and we'll have another call next week. Again, if questions come up at any time, please reach out to support@nativescript.org. We will try to get back to you as quick as we can. You can also ping the NativeScript Slack channel, and we would be happy to help you all with any update changes that you're doing. So if you do try out some of the 7.0 and have some issues, please let us know. It's a high priority to us for sure. But everyone take care out there. We will talk next week.